Poland, a new hero. Lech Wałęsa, unemployed electrician, is now a claimed leader of the strikes that are changing the face of Poland. Wałęsa's victory came in the shipyards at Gdansk, where he won for his fellow workers the right to strike and independent trade unions, things unheard of in post-war Eastern Europe. The shock waves from the Gdansk strikes reached right to the top of the Polish hierarchy. All seemed normal in May 1980, when Communist Party leader Edward Gierek was host to a Warsaw Pact meeting. Now, as a direct result of the wave of strikes and government concessions, Gierek is gone. Officially, he is too ill to carry on, but there is no doubt that it was pressure from within his own party, and from Moscow too, which caused his departure. Trade unions independent of the party are unthinkable to the communist ideologists. They challenge Marxism, Leninism itself, splitting Marx's working class from Lenin's Communist Party. The Soviet leadership kept ominously quiet about events in Poland. A military intervention, as in Czechoslovakia in 1968, was feared by some. But Gierek's head appears to have satisfied the hardliners, who were quick to welcome the man who succeeded him, Stanislaw Kania. A faithful party member with a state security background, Kania was welcomed by Moscow as a staunch champion of socialism and of unbreakable friendship with Russia. The imposing facade of the official trade union movement headquarters reflects the rigid system that the fledgling independent unions are challenging. They are insisting on open ballots and a free voice for their representatives, without the interference of the party. The widespread support given to the Gdansk strikers reflects a general dissatisfaction that many Poles feel about their everyday life. On the surface, Warsaw looks busy and prosperous, its citizens smartly dressed. But the national economy is in fact in deep trouble, and the people blame the leadership for mismanagement. Poland has invested heavily in a rapid industrialization program, leaving it with a hard currency foreign debt of $20 billion, much of it borrowed in the West. But the schemes the money went on are not even generating enough profit to pay for the interest on the loans. And the need to export, to earn foreign currency, has meant that the home market is desperately short of a whole range of consumer goods, everyday items as well as luxury ones, which affect every family. The older people have seen it all before. The immediate post-war years were understandably hard, but things never seemed to get much better. Previous protests in Poland were met with promises or stopgap measures. So this time, the strikers demanded a formal document. The Gdansk document, signed by government officials, listed 21 demands in all. Among them, a shorter waiting time for housing. But a slowing down in the building program means that the general standard of apartment blocks has fallen, and new or growing families have to put up with cramped accommodation. There are even reported cases of couples getting formally divorced so that each parent can have a small apartment and then exchanging the two for a larger one. Other demands include an improvement in pensions and the health scheme, longer paid maternity leave, and more day nurseries. The Polski Fiat, a version of the Italian car made in Poland, is a sought-after luxury item that can cost a worker 4 times his annual salary in zlotys, the Polish currency. But you can have one sooner and for a quarter that amount in hard foreign currency, simply because Poland needs it so badly. No wonder the Poles are angry with their leadership. The supermarket is another source of discontent. There have been chronic shortages of a whole range of foodstuffs, and not only of meat, which was one of the issues that triggered off the Gdansk protests. An extremely inefficient central distribution system means that almost anything can be missing from the shelves. Milk, butter, coffee, tea, washing powder, razor blades, flour and salt. All of these have been in short supply at one point or another over the last year. Add to this creeping inflation and slower pay rises, and you have an angry and dissatisfied public. Even with housekeeping money available, the shopper can walk all round a supermarket and still finish up with a pitiful range of foodstuffs to feed the family. Outside the supermarket, there are queues of shoppers at the private stalls, which flourish especially in the late summer when homegrown produce is readily available. This is part of Poland's parallel economy, based on private enterprise. A very wet summer has given rise to official warnings about the coming winter's food supplies. But smallholders, encouraged by the personal profit motive, make that extra effort to bring in their harvest safely. And the results are here to see. Generally, though, queuing outside shops has become a part of the Polish way of life. The longest queues are usually outside the so-called commercial shops, which sell food items in short supply at prices up to double the normal rate, on the simple principle of supply and demand. And sometimes you have to queue even for a bottle of milk. Above all, though, the Poles love their meat. And it was meat price rises on July the 1st that sparked off the scattered protest strikes that spread in mid-August to the economically vital port city of Gdansk on the Baltic coast. The city used to be called Danzig, part of East Prussia and then Germany. It's been rebuilt after the ravages of war into a flourishing port. The Lenin Shipyard is where all the momentous events of this summer have been taking place. The meat price protests were compounded here by the dismissals from the yard of a number of militants who have been attempting for the past few years to establish independent trade unions. Activist Lech Wałęsa suddenly emerged as their charismatic leader.
Eksperci, to znaczy te szóstki dwie, rządowa i nasza, debatują, to znaczy ustalają już konkretne rzeczy w punkcie 3. i 4. Jeszcze nie ustalili, jeszcze tam się mocno pocą.
The shipyard workers were delighted to hear their grievances expressed so forcefully by Wałęsa, a 37-year-old electrician, who knew what it meant to lose one's livelihood for challenging the official unions. His outspokenness further strengthened the resolve of the Gdansk strikers, most of whom remember clearly the tragic end to the city's previous unrest in 1970. Just outside the shipyard gates, a big wooden cross has been erected in memory of the 27 Gdansk workers who were killed by security forces during the 1970 rioting over high food prices. The troubles of 10 years ago ended the leadership of Władysław Gornicki, a fate now shared by Gierek. History has repeated itself. The shipyard workers were settling in for a long occupation. The workers' deaths in 1970 had taught them to keep off the streets and to keep calm. And they were more politicized. Better pay was not the basis of their demands. They were asking for the right to have a say in their own life at work, and the right to strike if they felt betrayed or ignored.
Jak i władze, że potrafimy na równorzędnych warunkach dyskutować i możemy się porozumieć.
No i o to się domagamy i chcemy całkowicie tej pewności, że będziemy żyli jako ludzie w kraju demokratycznym i będziemy mieli coraz to lepiej, a nie coraz gorzej.
The Lenin Shipyard had become a political forum. The workers knew they were challenging the system, and the Polish leadership gave the broadest of hints that the Soviet Union would not stand by and see the communist system attacked. Foreign news bulletins were listened to avidly. At the main gates to the shipyard, friends and relatives expressed their support, and the strikers' own news sheets gave details of how things were going. The Polish press gave extensive coverage to what was happening, which increased the morale of the workers still further. There was no going back now. They were determined to continue their action until their demands were met, and they settled in to pass the time as best they could. The theme was solidarity in the face of government insistence that there could be no basic changes in government policies. But party leader Gierek was forced to return early from a holiday in the Soviet Union and then to cancel a visit to West Germany. There were expressions of support and strike money contributions from several foreign countries, though support from the West came from trade union bodies, not governments. Enormous interest was aroused by the Gdansk strike, but Western governments were taking care to avoid any charge that they might be interfering in Poland's affairs.
Chcemy wszyscy wrócić z guzikami i z rzeczami do domu. Dlatego bardzo proszę nie rzucać ulotek przed bramą.
Petrol supplies dried up as tanker drivers went on strike in sympathy, and soon more than 50,000 people were staying away from work in Gdansk and surrounding towns. Keeping up the pressure, the newly elected Gdansk Inter-Factory Strike Committee formally listed 16 demands. To the right to strike and free trade unions, they added, among others, an end to censorship and free access to the media for the Catholic Church. All of Gdansk seemed prepared to see the strikes run their course. If the price of the workers' demands was a period of inconvenience, even hardship, it was clear that everyone was ready to pay it. In 1970, and again in 1976, promises had been made and then broken. More money was printed, loans were raised, and import-led growth produced the illusion of economic progress. This time, the new workers' leadership say there will be another big strike if no lasting remedy is found, and it's clearly no idle threat. As the weeks passed, the strikes spread further. Soon there were sympathy stoppages in Łódź, a town quite near to the capital and the country's second largest light industry centre. There was no public transport at all. Here in 1970, women textile workers had taken part in the strikes that brought down Gomulka. By August the 19th, the whole Baltic region was paralyzed. The big port of Szczecin, with its shipbuilding yards, was at a standstill, and panic buying left food shops empty. Strike committees helped by arranging special deliveries of groceries. The new committees were based on the Gdansk model and issued a similar list of demands. An unusual one was for Sunday Mass to be broadcast on the state television, and the authorities duly complied. This solidarity between various workers' groups across the country forced the government to give way at last. After initial unsuccessful negotiation attempts, Gierek announced a major government reshuffle, dismissing among others the Prime Minister, Edward Babiusz. Gierek also conceded the principle of free trade union elections. The government was giving ground all the time, and at last it sent a team of officials into the shipyard to discuss the details of a settlement. The government negotiators were obliged to walk through a silent and inhospitable crowd. The shipyard workers were quietly confident. The principle of electing their own trade union representatives had already been ceded, and they were determined to push for more. They were sure they had the best man to do so, Lech Wałęsa, who had so far managed to keep one step ahead of the government in all the tactical moves. The Lenin shipyard talks were now the focus of everyone's attention. There was drama in the air. Church leaders issued calls for peace and calm. There were rumors that Gierek was about to resign. The government leadership seemed split over whether truly independent trade unions could be granted.
Komisja rządowa po 7 i międzyzakładowy komitet strajkowy.
Everything was still in the balance. Would the hardliners in the Polish leadership win the day and put down the strikers with force? What probably persuaded the government to go ahead with the negotiations was the decision by the powerful coal miners of Silesia to support the shipyard workers. Ironically, Silesia was the power base of Gierek, himself a former miner. His former colleagues were about to play a decisive part in his downfall. Poland's miners are comparatively well paid. They do the hardest work, so their wages are among the highest in the country. The basic argument is not about money this time, though. It's about the alleged failure of the official unions to represent the workers' interests. The miners say recently imposed round-the-clock shift systems force them to work at weekends. They also blame them for a fall in safety standards, which recently led to fatal accidents. So the miners gathered at the pit heads before St. Barbara, their patron saint, and there they stayed on strike. The shipyard workers had their full support. Then came the defiant shouts. The miners knew they were in a strong position. Coal keeps industry running, and it is also Poland's main export. And events here closely followed those in the Lenin shipyard. Within a couple of days, government officials were sent to meet the miners. No doubt they were on the point of winning changes undreamt of just a few weeks previously. The Silesia document also guarantees free trade unions, as well as improved safety standards down the mines, a 5-day week, and a reduction in retirement age from 55 to 50. At the very end of August, the government put on a brave face and gave in to all the demands by the miners and shipyard workers, ending 2 months of economic and political unrest, or so both sides hoped. In Gdansk, a placard proclaims 21 times yes, the number of successful demands made by the shipyard committee. This day was the high point of the whole affair. Victory for the unofficial leaders, a whole series of improvements promised in the political, social and economic fields. And above all, that important weapon, the right to strike in future without fear of reprisals. Heroes of the hour were the workers' representatives like Walesa, who had led the negotiations. History had been against them in previous efforts to win independent unions in Eastern Europe, but but in spite of all, they had won the day. And to ensure their success, they gave the government until December to act on its promises. Big changes ahead then for the people of Poland. But one of the questions being asked is whether the government can afford to fulfill all its promises. One of Poland's leading political commentators, Wieslaw Gornicki, assesses the situation.
I don't want to sound over-optimistic. The problems that are facing the government are just enormous. I think I can admit that some of the demands presented by the striking workers seem a little bit unrealistic for me, because at the same time they want to have a tremendous wage increase, the most luxurious social system known in the world, for example 3 years of paid leave for every mother that gives birth to a child, is an institution not known to any nation in the world. While at the same time they want to reduce exports, increase imports, and in addition the miners don't want to work on Sundays and Saturdays, which will again reduce coal production, which is our basic hard currency source. I'm not saying it in order to discredit the demands. Most of the demands are born out of actual needs. But unless the government concessions and promises and the compromise are accompanied by increased efficiency in the productivity of the work, I doubt very much whether it can be, the deadline of December 31st may be really met.
Out of the city and into the country. The horse-drawn cart is a common enough sight in Poland, though it has disappeared from much of Western Europe. It's symbolic not only of the slower pace of life in the country, but also of a deeper division in Poland between the town dwellers and the farmers. In the cities, pay is better, but you can spend hours queuing or searching for the food you want. The farmers, on the other hand, never go short of food for themselves. Give an old peasant his couple of fields and few farm animals, and he can keep himself and his family with no trouble at all, regardless of the current balance of payments or foreign debts. If he had the chance to buy a new tractor, he probably would turn it down. He has his own land, 70 to 80% of farming land is privately owned, and as if by mutual agreement, he gets on with his work, regardless of decisions in Warsaw. Another private farm, but things are more modern here and geared more closely to the workings of the state. Onions are one of the main crops, and 30 tons are produced every year. They are then sold through a farmers' cooperative and go for export. Agricultural exports are essential to earn foreign currency, but the strikers have demanded more food on their tables, and the government certainly won't find it easy to satisfy both requirements. Farmer Zdzisław Pawidowski, who also produces 40,000 cauliflowers a year, owns 2 tractors and 2 trucks and employs 4 farm hands permanently, 10 at harvest and planting time. But he has complaints too. He had to wait 4 months for delivery of his last truck, and it's difficult to get new tractors. There is also a shortage of insecticides, he says, and insects and fungi are a big threat to his crops. He blames the government. Most country people, then, are sheltered from the big economic crises. They may sympathize with the industrial workers' complaints, but their own home and comfort comes first. Religion is another aspect of life in Poland that continues regardless of decisions in Warsaw. The Roman Catholic Church is the most powerful in Eastern Europe, with as many as 90% of Poles said to be practicing Catholics. The Sunday congregations here, including whole families, would gladden the heart of a priest or bishop anywhere. The church has had to learn to live with communism, and a kind of coexistence has been reached. The authority of the church has not been attacked, but at the same time, virtually no publicity has been given to the church's activities in the media. Things began to change, though, in 1978. The elevation of one of Poland's sons to head of the church has had a tremendous impact on the nation. Pope John Paul II, formerly Bishop Karol Wojtyła, became a national hero as the first non-Italian pontiff for centuries. His return home in June 1979 caused amazing scenes. The Pope has clearly strengthened not only his people's faith, but also their sense of national identity and pride. His portrait has been seen everywhere during the recent strikes, and there is little doubt that this charismatic man gave inspiration to all the workers involved in the fight for free trade unions. The excitement of August 1980, though, was about temporal issues, about man's right to have a say in his everyday life, something which the political system has failed to provide. From the struggle has emerged another Pole whose name and face have become familiar around the world.
I dlatego też, ponieważ jestem po tym szoku, ja myślałem, że jeszcze to potrwa ze 2 tygodnie.
Lech Wałęsa went from unemployed electrician to free trade union leader in a few drama-packed weeks. A deeply religious man who wore his rosary even when signing the historic agreement, he says he only has the workers' interests at heart, that he is not trying to overthrow the political system. But if by the end of the year the government's promises have been broken, he says he is ready to lead another strike. It's a deadline the Warsaw leadership must be eyeing with increasing apprehension.